Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Light and darkness were two of the 7 fundamental elemental rules. DDoS nature magical domain also involved the rule power of light and darkness. However, he only made use of the derived rules of these two elements. Fundamental elemental rules were closer to the essence of rule power, so they naturally suppressed the power of DDoS magical domain to a certain extent. With the difference in levels in the legendary realm, it was almost impossible to establish one's own magical domain in another party's magical domain forcefully. However, Lin Li had done it. Although he struggled to control the usually tame magical elements that started resisting his control now, his light and darkness magical domain still expanded in the nature magical domain slowly but steadily. Damn it! Level 22, that's 2 levels of difference. It's not a joke. Lin Li cursed internally, but he didn't dare to relax even a bit. He gritted his teeth, and blood vessels popped up near his temples. Even with his powerful mental strength, he still had to use all of it under such circumstances. With this continuous exhaustion of mental strength, Lin Li started to feel a little dizzy even though it was just the start of the battle. Lin Li could feel that the pressure he encountered in his light and darkness magical domain increased as the domain expanded more. The speed of expansion also slowed down in the process until the threshold of his resistance was reached. However, just then, the pressure from outside the light and darkness magical domain suddenly increased immensely. The level 22 legendary mage had retaliated. Lin Li's face darkened instantly. Fresh blood flew from his eyes, nose, and ears due to the forceful exhaustion of mental strength. The light and darkness magical domain was withdrawn suddenly under the pressure. If it had been another person, he probably would have fainted by now. However, Lin Li's consciousness suddenly became very clear with the external pressure, despite the exhaustion of mental strength. The ring made from the Evil Eye Tyrant's magical crystal had not only increased Lin Li's mental strength every minute, but also made his mental strength purer and more concentrated. Under the powerful pressure imposed by a level 22 legendary powerhouse, Lin Li, who had exhausted his mental strength beyond means, surprisingly fell into a fascinating realm. The entire world of magical elements was presented clearly in front of his eyes. Although he endured even greater pressure than before, he was now able to control magic with more ease. The magical elements strictly followed his instructions, and executed each magical sequence with precision like trained soldiers. Lin Li could even feel many things that he had never felt before from the waves of the external pressure. The magic of this level 22 elven legendary mage was no longer mysterious. It was as if he had grasped the pulse of his opponent's magic. Even a minute change couldn't escape Lin Li's eyes. This felt like a spark of light in the darkness. Lin Li consciously wanted to grasp something, but there seemed to be a veil in between. He could see it, but couldn't touch it. Humph. DDoS snorted. He was rather surprised that a human level 20 legendary mage could still remain standing under his powerful aura for so long. At the same time, he felt rather ashamed. Moreover, he had the Helios scepter with him. Even though it didn't help to increase his level, the magical attacks from it were far beyond the capacity of a level 22 legendary mage. DDoS raised his Helios scepter up high, and recited a string of whimsical elven language quickly. Powerful magic rippled through the defense shield of the square, and made the spectators experience a moment of suffocation. It was not hard to imagine how much pressure Lin Li would be experiencing inside the defense shield as DDoS' opponent. The spectators could clearly see that the pathetically small magical domain surrounding Lin Li's body completely disappeared under DDoS' powerful eruption of power. Was this the end? Everyone had this thought in their minds. At that exact moment, Lin Li clearly felt the layer of veil hindering him was sliced apart by a sharp knife, and everything became clear. Perhaps Lin Li looked no different from just now from a spectator's point of view. However, Lin Li knew very well that his accumulation of all this time had finally led to a qualitative change under the strong pressure of the level 22 legendary mage at that very second. He had broken through to level 21. Though the difference of one level between level 20 and level 21 seemed insignificant, it meant two different worlds to the legendary realm, especially for Lin Li. The understanding of world rules and usage of rule power were totally different upon reaching level 21, and he was like a frog leaping out of a well. With a different view, the perception of the world in and out of the well were completely different. 1. The mysterious and pressuring magic applied by the level 22 elven legendary mage seemed to have taken off all its camouflage and exposed its core essence. The magical elements sequence, the waves of mana, no detail could escape Lin Li's eyes. After deciphering every detail of his opponent's magic and domain, Lin Li could reconstruct his light and darkness magical domain under the strong pressure of his opponent's domain through his understanding of rule power, although he couldn't directly alter the rules of the nature magical domain. The snow-laden forest slowly lost its original green, and those leaping tree men turned gray and dull. What surprised people more was the fact that the crimson dragon that was fighting with the tree men lost its red color too. The entire harvest square slowly turned into a black and white world. People were used to seeing a vibrantly colored world, so they were not ready to see this black and white world at all. The spectators gasped. They had never seen anything as peculiar as this. Could it be a magical domain? Then was it light or darkness? In people's understanding, light and darkness were two conflicting elements. How could they be used to form a magical domain together? Moreover, Lin Li's abilities made many puzzled. He didn't seem to be behaving like a legendary mage who had just reached the legendary realm recently. Lin Li strengthened the powers of light and darkness continuously, and even gave up on the control of the frost domain. Without the support of the frost domain, the thick layer of snow melted quickly, revealing the charred trees beneath. From this moment onwards, in fact, DDoS was no longer fighting with Lin Li, but rather the two pieces of the debris of the stars that Lin Li held onto, holy light and gloomy dark. DDoS was fighting with the pure and powerful light and darkness rules that these pieces contained. Lin Li wasn't as unfamiliar with the usage of the two pieces of the debris of the stars as before. His understanding of the two rules was also much better than during the several times he'd used them before. Knowledge is the most powerful belief of a mage. This was the true gift Lin Li had gotten from the Blackstone Mountains. The Book of Eternity was not just a tool for becoming a god, but also contained a lifetime of experiences and thoughts of the god of mages, Juresco. The eternity in the Book of Eternity wasn't referring to the leaves of eternity, from which the book was made, but rather the deep knowledge inside the book. Only knowledge was truly eternal. As the god of mages, Juresco certainly had godlike magical skills. His magical skills shouldn't even be labeled as skills, as they had surpassed the levels of an art, and truly reached the divine realm. Lin Li read the Book of Eternity ever since he had come back from the Blackstone Mountains, and he gained so much from every single read. His understanding of magic itself as well as its usage now was far beyond what he had had when in the Blackstone Mountains. With the accumulation of knowledge through constant study, Lin Li naturally became more powerful by the day. The power that holy light and gloomy dark could release under his control was far greater than when he'd been in the Blackstone Mountains. Holy light and gloomy dark were not just magical weapons now, and were not even limited to constructing the light and darkness domain. Back at the Endless World, Lin Li was only a hunter when he had gotten the Stars of Fury and the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Hence, his usage of the debris of the stars was very simple. He'd install them on the Stars of Fury and pull the trigger. Back then, he had never thought that the debris of the stars could be used for anything other than shooting. To a certain extent, holy light and gloomy dark had integrated with Lin Li as one. However, they also seemed to be gifted with life, and became individual presences. Even without Lin Li's control, they still followed their own rules and unleashed their rule power to deal with the various changes in the rule domain. Although others saw a battle between Lin Li and Vidas, the actual battle played out between Vidas and the two pieces of the debris of the stars, holy light and gloomy dark, which made use of rule power. Lin Li just waited in silence at the side, waiting for an opportunity to truly threaten this level 22 legendary mage. After all, Vidas was still a level 22 legendary mage who had created a nature magical domain with small world rule. Hence, he had immense advantage even when battling a human mage of similar level, not to mention Lin Li, who had just reached level 211. The series of shocking moves that Lin Li had made, including summoning the level 21 Crimson Dragon and the 2 pieces of the debris of the stars, were just to cause some trouble to Vidas while ensuring his own safety. In order to truly defeat Vidas, this was far from enough. Everything in the square turned black and white. The Crimson Dragon turned into a black dragon, and the fire it spat out became white. Those leaping tree men turned charcoal black when they didn't even reach the flames. Although the battle in this black and white world seemed dull compared to the vibrant world earlier, it was still something new for the spectators who had never seen a black and white world before. Before Lin Li had released his light and darkness domain, the tree men smashed by the Crimson Dragon and the grass burned by the dragon's fire all returned to their original state instantly. However, in this black and white world now, the recovery of the nature domain was evidently much slower. This made Lin Li gradually relax his locked eyebrows. With William's vision, he could naturally see that Lin Li's life wasn't threatened at the very least. How is that? Continue the bet. Nobody wants to increase his bet? Hey, old gambler, you'd better be clear with that betting list. If there's any problem, I will go to your casino every day with my men, Sienna yelled excitedly. He couldn't help but feel excited, since those people who had bet against him had bet a total of more than 7 million gold coins. Although these coins were not his yet, he believed that they were just temporarily in the hands of others now. Seeing Sienna's arrogance, the others didn't mock him like before. Instead, they stared at the center of the square tensely, praying that the elf named Vidas wouldn't disappoint them. They had thought the outcome of the battle was clear, and wanted to mock Sienna. That was why they had bet so much money, thinking it would still be in their pockets in the end. However, judging from the current situation, they regretted their decision so much. They had outsmarted themselves. Wilkinson and his companion stared at the center of the square with admiration. Nobody would believe the person standing on the back of the black dragon was just 20 years old. Nobody would also believe that he had already reached the level of a pharmaceutics master. Though being a pharmaceutics master and a legendary mage wasn't conflicting, and was even a typical phenomenon, it was still unbelievable when it came to a youth who was just 20. Wilkinson thanked his teacher, who had sent him to the Tower of Dusk, all the more in his heart. This training was a chance for him to achieve a meteoric rise in abilities. If not for this chance, he would still be a medium-level pharmacist, accepting all the flattery from others in the pharmacist guild. The spectators each had different thoughts in mind, but all of them locked their eyes above the square to concentrate on the black and white but vigorous battle, not wanting to miss a moment of it. Suddenly, everyone thought they had seen an illusion. The black and white scene flashed quickly for a few times as if they had blinked. Many people rubbed their eyes hard simultaneously, only to realize the frequency of the flashing had increased. Vidas finally retaliated. No matter how bizarre Lin Li's magical domain was, the difference in level wasn't so easily made up for. As he increased the power of the nature magical domain by giving his all, the flashes turned longer, changing the scene from black and white to green for an instant each time. Even people who weren't sure of the situation could see that Vidas had regained the upper hand now. However, what Vidas was battling wholeheartedly was in fact merely the 2 pieces of the debris of the stars, holy light and gloomy dark. Vidas' real enemy, Lin Li, didn't suffer much pressure from Vidas, and just stood there like a spectator. This was the chance Lin Li had been waiting for. When holy light and gloomy dark had taken up all of Vidas' attention and strength, withdrawing it all at once wasn't an easy task. Lin Li's summoning lamp flashed, and the magic lamp that was first sealed, Lord of Nightmares, was summoned. This Lord of Nightmares was first used by Lin Li to deal with those mercenaries sent by Harvey back in the Blackstone Mountains. However, the Lord of Nightmares wasn't so weak given the fact that it had once been a true demon lord. However, the Lord of Nightmares didn't pounce at Vidas directly. Its body spread all around the area like fog. Lin Li put away his summoning lamp and resumed control over the light and darkness domain. He exerted more pressure on Vidas in a bid to prevent him from being able to deal with external factors. The Lord of Nightmares had completely lost its original form, and blended into the light and darkness domain. It turned into a faintly discernible fog, slowly expanding in the light and darkness domain. Nobody noticed that the fog the Lord of Nightmares had transformed into expanded more and more with every flash between the colorful and black and white world. The area it covered was even approaching the tree crown Vidas was standing on. Only when the flashing stopped and the world was fixed as black and white did people realize in shock that a thick fog had enveloped the spot that Vidas was standing at. This fog didn't stop just right there. After the light and darkness domain stabilized, it spread throughout the entire domain with astounding speed. Finally, no more flashes. Many spectators groaned as they rubbed their foreheads. The high-frequency flashes between a colorful and black and white world had made all low-ability spectators very dizzy. They even thought they were under some magical curse. Now that the world was fixed as black and white, they felt much more comfortable and less worried. These people were just dazed by the flashes, but didn't understand anything about the battle at all until now. A battle between legendary powerhouses couldn't be understood by people who hadn't reached the legendary realm yet. They could only know something about the battle from legends and hearsays. Not to mention these people, even the knowledgeable appraiser, Master William, couldn't figure out what was going on now. Arathar's lips moved, but he didn't dare to ask William, and only stared at the center of the square with many thoughts in mind. Everyone was staring at the square, but the square had nothing to see. There was no sign of Vidas or the lush forest in the nature domain. Only thick fog was visible. Humph. This is ridiculous. Do you think you can defeat me just like this? Vidas sneered in the fog. This sudden change didn't affect his confidence. He mocked, the difference between level 20 and level 22 is uncompensable. I acknowledge your abilities and techniques. After all, you were able to reach legendary realm at such a young age. However, don't forget that there's still different standards in the legendary realm. With your current abilities, you can't control a complex domain well. Give up. If you persist, you will only be injured by your own domain. I won't be harmed at all. As Vidas' voice rang out, those people who were worried about their bet now jumped in joy. Although they weren't sure about the legendary realm, everyone knew what the difference in levels meant given that Vidas had said it so outright. However, Lin Li neither responded to Vidas nor stopped his actions. The fog in the light and darkness domain continued to toss and turn. It didn't get thinner as it spread over a larger area, but rather became thicker till it turned opaque. Under the puzzled glances from the spectators, the fog tossed and turned until Lin Li was also engulfed by it. Everyone watched the square with a stunned face. That area was like a crystal jar filled with thick fog. Other than fog, all they could see was still fog. The Lord of Nightmares was originally the abyssal demon lord sealed in this summoning lamp after being defeated by the magic legion led by the High Lord of the High Elves, Osric. According to Canoris, there were 12 summoning lamps at first, prepared by Osric to be used as weapons for the eternal furnace. However, the High Elves' regime was completely overthrown before he could finish building the eternal furnace. Hence, the 12 summoning lamps all disappeared without a trace. This lamp Lin Li held on to now was a gift from Inglos from the Brilliance Shrine, given to Lin Li when he was appointed the president of the Guild of Magic. However, he hadn't gotten it for nothing. Pope Rosario had been poisoned by a prehistoric viper, and needed a cure, which was a potion hard to concoct. Though the Lord of Nightmares had only been the demon lord of the first few levels of the abyss, it still had the power of the legendary realm. However, its strength decreased immensely after being sealed by Osric. Although Lin Li was the owner of the summoning lamp, he couldn't gain full control of the Lord of Nightmares' power. He could only borrow a fraction of its power every time he summoned the Lord of Nightmares. Instead of saying summoning the Lord of Nightmares, it was more accurate to call it unsealing. After all, Vidas was a level 22 legendary mage, and just summoning a shadow of the Lord of Nightmares wouldn't do any harm to him. After the Lord of Nightmares had integrated itself into the light and darkness domain, its sealed power was immediately recovered, and its strength increased exponentially, making it even more powerful than at its peak. An endless dream was created, and trapped both Lin Li and Vidas inside. This power wasn't violent, but it seamlessly reached the bodies of people without any defense. The spectators stared at the center of the square, stunned, but they couldn't see anything other than that jar of fog. Moreover, they hadn't heard anything else after Vidas had spoken. Hence, nobody knew what was happening inside. Lin Li was undoubtedly making a huge and dangerous gamble by coming up with such a move. He was putting Vidas and himself in a situation that was extremely dangerous. Although he had the summoning lamp, the effects of the lamp would be greatly decreased and hindered when the Lord of Nightmares maximized his abilities. However, it was indeed the best way to deal with Vidas at this juncture. Lin Li had just broken through to level 21, but the difference between him and the level 22 Vidas could not be compensated for at all. Although Lin Li had summoned the Crimson Dragon and activated Holy Light and Gloomy Dark, the debris of the stars, there was still a huge distance between them that could not be closed. Hence, not only did Lin Li release the Lord of Nightmares, he also controlled the light and darkness domain, allowing the Lord of Nightmares to absorb all of the energy and advance from a fallen creature of the legendary realm, a level 22 legend. Although the Lord of Nightmares was on the same level as Vidas now, with the combination of the characteristics of the Lord of Nightmares domain and the light and darkness domain, there was no way Vidas could resist, hence, he sunk deep into a trance. Although Lin Li also ended up getting attacked by the Lord of Nightmares because he had lost control over him, the Lord of Nightmares' level 22 power seemed to have become insignificant. It would mean that Lin Li and Vidas were put on the same level, and they both had to face an endless dream induced by the Lord of Nightmares domain. Lin Li had no idea what Vidas would be meeting with, nor did he have the time to make any guesses, because he had already begun a surreal journey in a dream. The spectators were staring foolishly at the center of the square even though they could not see anything because of the thick fumes of smoke. Besides, everything seemed to have come to a standstill after Vidas spoke. No one knew what went on in there. All Arather could do was order his subordinates to supply the power core of the Mageweth with more magical crystals to maintain the defensive force of the entire protective barrier. God knew what damage the two legendary figures might do to the entire city if there wasn't a protective barrier to protect it. Wilkinson closed his eyes slightly and leaned back in the seat. Although he seemed to be resting, he had never felt so nervous before. Wilkinson and the other pharmacists were also staring at the square nervously. Although Sienna was extremely confident in Lin Li, he still felt nervous because he could not see anything at all. The others on the viewing decks were feeling nervous and worried because they had bet heavily on Vidas. The power and abilities exhibited by the young Lin Li were extremely formidable and daunting. If the 20-year-old legendary mage, Lin Li, could win the battle, the Tower of Dusk would definitely become one of the strongest forces of the Breezy Plains. That would greatly affect the structure of the Breezy Plains. If he were to lose, no one would be surprised as to what it would entail, because they all thought that it was impossible for him not to have the support of some major force. If anything were to happen to him, there would definitely be a major shuffle in the forces of the Breezy Plains. Everyone was feeling nervous, but the center of the square was bizarrely quiet, and nothing could be seen. All the spectators could do was wait patiently for the revelation at the end. Lin Li had already lost track of time. His dream seemed to be a microcosm of life where there were highs and lows, ups and downs, happiness and misery, and peace and danger. The initial absurdity began to fade as everything started to seem realistic. The Lord of Nightmares continuously adjusted the scenes in the dreams. Before Lin Li decided to release the Lord of Nightmares, he had indeed considered his immunity to the dream, and felt that the greatest joy and most entertaining aspect of transmigration was the opportunity to experience a different life. For example, novels, movies, television dramas, and online games were actually opportunities for others to experience a different life. However, when Lin Li truly sunk into the dream conjured by the Lord of Nightmares, he finally realized that it was possible for one to be fully immersed in a dream despite being aware that it was not reality. When one was yelling for a dream to stop, it was perhaps just the beginning, and when came the end of the dream would forever be unknown. Lin Li had once been an abyssal demon which had been subdued by Osric's magic Legion 1. He had also been one of the hideous and grotesque goblins, which got destroyed in a massacre carried out by the High Elves. He had been a dwarf who spent his entire life refining iron. He had also assumed other identities, like a soldier, bandit, aristocrat, and even king. He had experienced all types of lives, and had even once become an elf in the Emerald Forest. He'd learned magic under the strict guidance of his elders, respected and admired by his peers. There were plenty of strange dreams, each one more dangerous than the one preceding it. One careless mistake would cause the dreamer to end up losing himself and becoming the slave of the Lord of Nightmares. If that were to happen to Lin Li, he would be the first unlucky fool to be enslaved by the creature that he summoned. However, Lin Li's transmigration experience had indeed given him some immunity to all sorts of dreams, and his strong willpower allowed him to wake up from the dream in the end. In fact, Lin Li even gained more tenacity through the training and experiences he had in the dream. His mental strength increased, and he also discovered plenty of unknown secrets. Hey, hurry and look. The fog is dissipating, and the people within are appearing, someone from the viewing deck yelled. Actually, everyone on the deck had already noticed it even before that person reminded them about it. Although it was rather boring to stare at fog, everyone on the viewing deck never stopped paying attention to the scene. The black fog within the barrier gradually dissipated, and turned from black to gray, and then finally colorless. It revealed plenty of scenes. The lush nature domain had long disappeared, and the square was also restored to its original appearance, including the tiles on the ground, which remained seamless. In the vast and flat square, there were only 2 figures remaining. Although none of them had fallen, it was obvious who the victor was. Everyone could see how pale Vidas was, and they also noticed the horror in his eyes. He was just like a frightened bird that had already lost the demeanor that he ought to have as a legendary level 22 figure. On the other hand, Mage Felik walked towards Vidas, smiling, and extended his arm towards him. Mage Felik, please show some mercy, please show some mercy. Arather shrieked in terror as he flew down the deck and dashed towards the square. However, he had forgotten that there was a protective barrier that even a legendary figure could not break. Thud. Arather's body slammed against the wall, which he then slid down along, leaving behind a clear trail of blood. Lin Li cocked his head towards the side and smiled. However, he did not stop, and instead grabbed the Helios scepter from Vidas and yanked it free from Vidas' hold. The protective field was shut down. Arather wiped the blood off of his nose before scurrying towards them. Castellan Arather, according to the bet, this item belongs to me now. Surely you won't oppose it, will you? Lin Li asked, while fiddling with Helios' scepter. Go ahead, what else was there for him to oppose? Lin Li had already defeated a level 22 legendary mage, hence, there was no reason for Arather to oppose it at all. He was just concerned about Vidas' current condition. However, when he walked towards Vidas, he discovered that the latter had lost his usual arrogance and his eyes had turned glassy. Fear was written all over his face, and he seemed to have gotten a great shock. Wilkinson and the other pharmacists and William frantically chased after Arather, scrambling towards the middle of the square. Their greatest concern at the moment was Lin Li's safety. After all, the battle had been way too intimidating, and it made them think that the young and ingenious Lin Li had already faced his defeat. William scanned Lin Li from head to toe, and only heaved a sigh of relief after seeing that he did not sustain any obvious injuries. Still feeling a little worried, he said, Master Felik, are you all right? He sounded servient, and seemed to be trying to suck up to Lin Li. However, Wilkinson and the rest pushed him away in a hostile manner before Lin Li even answered. Wilkinson and the rest had already considered Lin Li to be their teacher. Although the elven mage Vidas was the one who'd started the bet, they definitely didn't have a good impression of William. If it weren't because of William's invitation, Lin Li wouldn't have brought Wilkinson and the other pharmacists to the auction. If it weren't because of the auction, would the battle have happened? He didn't send the branch of the Tree of Eternity to the Tower of Dusk, and Wilkinson was infuriated by that. He thought, did William think that Master Felik would shortchange him? Who else would be able to afford to pay 15 million gold coins for it? Of course, even though Wilkinson was displeased with William, his main concern at the moment was still Lin Li's condition. The bunch of pharmacists frantically surrounded Lin Li and asked about his condition and whether he was all right. They wanted to know if he was unwell and if he needed some potions. They even offered the potions that they had concocted themselves, and introduced him to their respective effects, all for fear that Lin Li had sustained internal injuries from the battle. Lin Li did not react much, but the other guests who rushed forth stared at him with their eyes wide open, all green with envy. Unfortunately for them, they did not have the rights to step forth to chime in, and could only watch from the side. No one had expected that the battle whose outcome they had been extremely certain of at first would turn out to have such a surprising end. Actually, it was not everyone, for there were some who believed right from the start that Master Felix would win. The thought of it made the gamblers' faces grow sullen, and they thought to themselves, where the heck did Sienna get that insider information from? How did that scoundrel know that mage Felix would definitely win for sure? Damn it, he even won so crushingly. The level 22 legendary mage even almost got beaten into a nutcase by that pervert. Lin Li triumphed over the elven legendary mage Vidas in the end. Apart from winning Helios Scepter, he also achieved a breakthrough, which bestowed his abilities with a massive change. He was undoubtedly the greatest winner that day. The other winner was none other than Sienna, who was grinning widely from ear to ear. No one had believed that Lin Li would win, and they were all waiting to see Sienna make a fool out of himself. Apart from those who dared not offend Sienna, everyone else placed bets that were worth hundreds of thousands of gold coins, causing the cumulative pot to end up amounting to almost 10 million gold coins. Sienna placed a 500,000 gold coin bet, and even if they were to win, they would only receive a few gold coins. However, now that Sienna had won, he would be receiving the entire pot of almost 10 million gold coins. Of course he'd be thrilled about the windfall. After reaching an agreement with the old gambler Jefferson, Sienna stepped onto the square with happiness written all over his face, and walked towards Lin Li. He obviously wouldn't dare to keep the gold coins without saying anything. Although he had already placed a bet, Master Felix was the one who allowed him to win it. Those who were feeling upset, unlike Sienna, were unhappy not only because they had become fools because of Sienna, but rather because they discovered how formidable Lin Li was. Master Felix was the owner of the Tower of Dusk and the president of the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic, which housed the pharmacists they'd wanted to poach earlier on. Had they known earlier that the legendary mage Felix was the owner of the Tower of Dusk, they would have never dared to poach the pharmacists, for it was akin to courting death. Some of them had long broken out in a cold sweat, and were nervously wiping the sweat off of their foreheads while feeling fortunate. They were not kind-hearted people, and when the branch was auctioned off for 15 million gold coins, they were thinking about snatching the branch from the upstart Lin Li after he left. They thought that Lin Li was just an arrogant idiot who knew nothing, and felt that the security in Roland City was insignificant. However, in reality, the ridiculous thing was that the idiot turned out to be them instead. If it weren't because of Vidas, perhaps they would have been destroyed for trying to rob Lin Li. There was nothing more absurd and silly than that. Although they were all leaders of strong, major forces, everyone knew that they were just an absolute joke in front of the legendary powerhouses. Those legendary mages had the ability to destroy them and their city completely without much effort. It was apparent from the way the Harvest Square looked now. The millennium-old Harvest Square couldn't even withstand the damage that resulted from the two extraordinary mages' battle, despite the Manhwa arrays. It was ruined beyond recognition. Only legends could compare to legends, especially those who had attained magical domains. Those below the legendary realm were all insignificant. Not to mention, the owner of the Tower of Dusk was not only a strong legendary mage, he had also defeated another legendary mage. However, he was only 20 years old. Although the guests had all lost the bet to Sienna, none of them were fools, especially since they had received an invitation to the auction. They were well aware of what the 20-year-old Lin Li signified. Upon sight of Sienna walking towards the middle of the square, the people standing by the square looked at each other. Although there was no verbal communication involved, they shared tacit understanding through eye contact. Since their mistakes had been made, what they had to do now was not to escape reality, but to find ways to make up for it. Otherwise, their forces might just disappear from the breezy plains one day. At the thought of the tragic end that they might face, everyone could not help but shiver and step into the square. Click! The smooth and clean lapis lazuli of the square's ground shattered loudly and clearly like glass despite having endured countless gladiator competitions over the past years. The cracks seemed to have spread like a cobweb from the feet of the guests and towards the rest of the platform on the square. Next, everyone felt themselves losing balance and sinking downwards involuntarily. The firm ground seemed to have become hollow too. Before they could even react, the 84 stone pillars surrounding the square also collapsed in all directions, causing thick layers of dust to fill the air. The huge stone pillars slammed heavily onto the ground, causing a loud and explosive sound that was accompanied by splashing stone debris. The pillars near the viewing decks completely ruined the decks too. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, and the initially perfect harvest square was destroyed before them. Everyone knew that the legendary mages were strong and formidable, to the extent of being unparalleled. However, at the start, everyone had had no clear idea exactly how strong they were. They finally had a deeper understanding of how strong they were after the experience. It would be easy to destroy a square, but not if the square was surrounded by a strong defensive magewef. Achieving the latter would be an incredible feat, as the castellan of Roland City, Arather was well aware of the strength of the magewef of the Harvest Square. That was also the very reason he'd chosen to host the battle there. He'd been confident that the magewef could withstand the damage inflicted by the two of them, but the Harvest Square was clearly in need of maintenance. Arather stood in the pit and looked at the rundown square that had been destroyed on all sides, feeling extremely agonized. Lin Li was not surprised by this situation at all. Although the nature domain used by Vidas was termed as a magical domain of the small world rules, the foundation was based on elemental rules of earth element. When Vidas exhibited the nature domain just now, he also manipulated the earth element in addition to putting his mana to use. Hence, it was not surprising that the square had been destroyed. This sudden change caused many people to be affected and dirted by the debris, though Lin Li managed to use magic to protect Wilkinson and the other pharmacists in time. Hence, Lin Li and the pharmacists were the only ones in the square, standing on a small, circular patch that remained unaffected. Lin Li stood still and spoke to Wilkinson and others indifferently. He would occasionally respond to William, and did not seem like he had just fought a thrilling battle. However, in his heart, Lin Li was constantly thinking about the legendary battle that had been absolutely daunting. He was the only one who knew how tough and dangerous that battle had been just now. The elven legendary mage Vidas was undoubtedly a descendant of Helios. A level 22 legendary mage was definitely a powerhouse who would be at the top of the hierarchy in Amril. Except for those legendary powerhouses that only existed in myths and tales, elven legendary mages were almost invincible. In fact, even a legendary mage could not afford to provoke them. Lin Li was actually rather well aware of his own strength and abilities, though his self-awareness did not affect his confidence. Although he used to be a top-level 20 legendary mage, he held 3 pieces of the debris of the stars, and had a terrifying advantage of being a master of all trades. However, he really was not as good as the elf, Vidas. The gap between them was not just in level, but also in terms of combat experience and understanding of the rules. Even the magic that he was proud of was inferior when compared to the elven legendary mages. That was how formidable and unique the elves were. Apart from the high elves who were deemed as the most perfect creatures in the world, the elves were perhaps the most unique mages. Their natural physical affinity with elements allowed them to accumulate magic at an unimaginable speed. Even a newborn elf would easily be recognized as a mage. That was impressive even if compared to the high elves. What made the human race even more jealous was the fact that the elves were the apple of the goddess of nature, ManhwaRecap's eye. They had extremely long lives that granted them the opportunity to become formidable and unrivaled even if they were to use just 1/10 of their time studying magic. The only good thing was that compared to the huge population of humans, the number of elves had always been small. Otherwise, they would have long ruled the entire world of Amril like the High Elves. As the descendant of Helios, the legendary mage Vidas was clearly a classic elf. His extremely long life had brought him incomparable combat power, and let him suppress Lin Li during the battle just now. Despite being under that unbearable pressure and suppression, Lin Li had actually made a breakthrough, and advanced from level 20 to level 21. That was an absolute difference in strength. Even though Lin Li had broken through to level 21, the light and darkness domain that he had created actually was not on par with Vidas' nature domain. If it weren't for the fact that he had already seized the opportunity to turn this situation around by using the summoning lamp to summon the Lord of Nightmares from the abyss, the outcome of the battle might have been different. The thought of it made Lin Li feel terrified even though he remained calm on the surface. Although the Lord of Nightmares, who used to be a demon lord, did not show too strong of a combat prowess in the previous battles, Lin Li actually knew that the true power of the Lord of Nightmares should not be reflected in this aspect. The most brilliant thing about the Lord of Nightmares was that he could manipulate dreams. This advantage had never impressed Lin Li, hence, that ability had rarely been showcased on his orders. For example, the Lord of Nightmares would be doomed to be powerless when faced with the Lord of Darkness in the Abyss of Tharlan. At the end of the day, the Lord of Nightmares was still just a top-tier demon lord who could never compare to the level 27 Lord of Darkness of the Abyss of Tharlan, regardless of how well he could manipulate dreams. That was the level rule that had existed since a long time ago. It could never be changed, even if the Lord of Nightmares had already been sealed and contained in the summoning lamp. When Lin Li faced the Crimson Dragon in the underground palace back then, the Lord of Nightmares could not cause the simple-minded WYRM to slip into a complicated nightmare. In fact, it was still a debatable issue as to whether or not simple-minded beasts like WYRMs could slip into nightmares and dreams. That was the limit of the Lord of Nightmares' abilities, which was also the reason he could only dominate the first few levels of the Abyss. However, things were much different during the battle between Lin Li and Vidas. Although the level 22 Vidas was impressive and formidable, he was still an elf at the end of the day. Although it sounded rather contradictory, it was indeed very interesting. Vidas possessed such great power mostly because he carried the elven blood. However, his identity of an elf was also the very reason he'd lost the battle and the gamble. Nothing was perfect in this world, and the elves were contradictory entities to begin with. They were unique, and had element affinity as well as long lifespans that humans were jealous of. However, they also had some handicaps, which was rather ridiculous. Even a mage apprentice in Amril would know that the best way to deal with an elf was to use mental spells, be it a level 5 delirium or a level 20 soul puppet. As long as mental spells were used on elves, there would definitely be unexpected effects. This was a characteristic of elves, a race that was inherently full of contradictions. They were born with the power to pursue all the good things, and detested all the ugly beings. The world of elves was always black and white, and their outlook on life was much weaker and worse than that of human children. The Lord of Nightmares' strongest ability was his proficiency in mental spells, of course. As a true master of mental spells, the Lord of Nightmares could manipulate dreams as and when it wanted to. Even though the legendary mage Vidas was level 22, he was extremely fragile in terms of mental strength when faced with the Lord of Nightmares, who could easily invade his dreams, especially when Lin Li incorporated the Lord of Nightmares into the light and darkness domain and lent its power to the Lord of Nightmares. It then possessed a terrifying power that was unprecedented. That power was close to level 22, and it wouldn't be inferior even compared to Vidas. Under such circumstances, it was only normal for the legendary mage Vidas to be controlled by the Lord of Nightmares. If it were to happen during other times, such dream manipulation wouldn't be a big deal. After all, a level 22 legendary mage wouldn't be destroyed as long as his domain was still intact, regardless of whether his dreams were manipulated. No matter how horrifying and absurd the dream might be, it would be rather difficult to inflict actual harm on Vidas. Unfortunately, Vidas ran into Lin Li this time. The dreams that Lin Li had created through the Lord of Nightmares were terrifying enough to scare even historical figures like Apophis and Rosario. The terrifying world that was made of reinforced concrete contained big steel birds that flew in the sky and poor human beings who were locked in boxes. As if that wasn't daunting enough, there were still sword sages who could contort their bodies into horrifying shapes. The handsome demon, Brother Zung, the legendary mage who controlled meteor showers, and the prophet Phoenix Lady whom no one could match up to in the past 500 years. Everything was beyond Vidas' imagination. He could not understand how the young president of the Guild of Magic would have such a shameful past. Although the battle had already ended, people like Vidas would be able to figure out the reason for their loss with some brief analysis. However, he had no choice but to admit that the young president of the Guild of Magic was indeed a true genius. His talent went far beyond magic, and although it was horrifying that he had become a legendary mage, despite being only 20 years old, what truly shocked Vidas was the incredible talent that the young Lin Li had showcased during the battle. It was an impressive ability that Vidas had never seen before, be it Lin Li's usage of magical power or his grasp of the changes in magical waves, as well as his determination. There was no doubt that the young mage had defeated him by manipulating dreams, but as a level 22 legendary mage, Vidas obviously knew that dreams were not created out of nowhere, and there must have been an actual source to make it possible. He was sure that the realistic dreams he had were experiences that Lin Li had gone through. That was what scared Vidas the most. He couldn't imagine how tough a person had to be to remain normal after such terrible experiences. Although Vidas did not lose in terms of magical abilities, he was convinced by the young human legendary mage. Therefore, although Lin Li took away Helios' scepter which he could not bear to give away at all, his pride as an elf prevented him from going back on his word. As the winner of the legendary realm battle, Lin Li's gains today were undoubtedly the biggest. However, achieving a breakthrough under the massive pressure and suppression of one's opponent was not that great of a gain or accomplishment, since he'd already been at the peak of level 20, and it had only been a matter of time before he'd break through to level 21. Lin Li was very clear that the benefits that the battle had brought him went far beyond the advancement to level 21. A battle between legendary powerhouses, especially those like Vidas, was rather rare for most, and one might never experience one in their entire life. Hence, it was an extremely valuable experience for Lin Li. Fighting with a legendary mage who was also an acquaintance could at most only be regarded as a spar, because no one would exert their full power. However, many things could only be comprehended when one was on the brink of death. What Lin Li had been lacking after becoming a legendary mage was exactly an actual opponent. The impact of the legendary realm battle was absolutely great on Lin Li. Although the effects had yet to show, Lin Li was well aware that the impact on himself left by this battle was far more than just the seemingly simple increase of control of strength and familiarization with rules. The near-death experience would take him to greater heights in his magic journey. Oh, and this. Lin Li took Helios' scepter out of his hand. The gains of the battle extended beyond just valuable experience, and the scepter was definitely an unexpected surprise. Originally, he'd believed that if Vidas could not recognize the new debris of the stars, he wouldn't have known the true value of the branch. Hence, the so-called stake of equivalent value would not have been too great. However, Lin Li could immediately tell the extraordinariness of the scepter. The rod of Helios' scepter was not as elaborate as the currently existing staffs. Instead, it was rather simple, awkward, and had a typical Dark Age style. The material that the scepter was made of was mentioned in many historical books, and was said to have come from the tree of life of the Emerald Forest. Legend had it that in the era when the High Elves ruled the world of Anril, there were countless trees of life growing next to the Tree of Eternity. The trees of life were just like subjects clustered around the King of Trees, the Tree of Eternity. In fact, the relationship between them was almost the same as it seemed. The Tree of Eternity possessed endless power, and had brought about a major calamity and disaster to Anril when it collapsed back then. The energy was actually provided by the Trees of Life, which continuously absorbed the elemental power between heaven and earth, and supplied it to the Tree of Eternity. They were like worker bees and their queen bee. Therefore, the branches of the Trees of Life were undoubtedly one of the most suitable materials for making staffs. The natural element absorption ability of the trees was sufficient for the mage holding the staff to cast any spells as he pleased. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. It was just like the Helios scepter in his hand, which possessed an astonishing ability to absorb the magical elements of the world. Usually, a level 13 or level 14 mage would be able to command magic close to the archmage level by using the scepter. Not to mention, Lin Li himself had once experienced it himself. Vidas had managed to give him a hard time just now by using Helios scepter. The top of Helios scepter was encrusted with a milky white gemstone that was the size of an egg. It emitted a mellow glow, but do not be fooled by its appearance and think that it was as weak as it appeared. When Vidas whipped out Helios scepter, Lin Li instantly recognized it to be the brilliant sunstone which contained the most vigorous solar power. It was said that the brilliant sunstone was a fragment of the sun. Had it been before he came to Amril, Lin Li would have definitely disregarded the mythical backstory. However, he was now in Amril, and had no idea how the sun above him had come about. He was clueless as to whether it was a celestial body or a real deity one. Hence, it didn't seem impossible for the sunstone to be a fragment of the sun. After all, its appearance indeed had something to do with the solar activity of this world. In this world, brilliant sunstones were rare, and those that had been found every now and then were all pea-sized. However, every tiny gemstone contained enough power to render it comparable to level 15 magical crystals. The egg-sized sunstone encrusted on the top of Helios scepter was by no means inferior to a legendary magical crystal. The brilliant sunstone had two magical attributes, light and fire, both of which had great strengthening effects on light magic and fire magic. Even if it were placed in the brilliant shrine, it would definitely be a treasure. If it were to be put up for auction, it wouldn't be a problem for it to be sold for tens of millions of gold coins. In fact, any legendary mage who had obtained such a gemstone would never be willing to put it up for auction. Such a brilliant sunstone was definitely a rare treasure. In addition to the branch of the Tree of Life being the body of the Helios scepter, there was also a huge, brilliant sunstone encrusted on the top. The mageweth used by the scepter was also a highlight that couldn't be ignored. Lin Li, who had the judgment of a guru, felt that the mageweth of the Helios scepter could be considered a rare work of art, and was definitely the masterpiece of a master. Mageweths of such high standards were rare in Amril. Several wars broke out at the end of the Dark Age, and although the High Elves were overthrown, the wars resulted in succession issues in various professions and industries. Although there were also masters in various professions, like master pharmacists and master blacksmiths, they were obviously inferior to those of the Dark Age. Even after thousands of years of research and improvement made by humans, Lin Li could still confidently assert that there was absolutely not a single master who could draw the mageweth on the Helios scepter. In the eyes of Lin Li, who was a guru, the mageweth on the Helios scepter was only a masterpiece of a master, though there were plenty of highlights about it which he could learn from. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that if a master of inscriptions thoroughly studied the mageweth on the Helios scepter, he wouldn't be far from being promoted to a guru. This master-level mageweth had closely combined the brilliant sunstone and the branch of the Tree of Life. It was not just a combination of gemstones, but was also the forging of the powers of the two through communication between mageweths. The merging would mean that they were no longer individual entities, and the fused body would exert power that was far more complicated than just 1+1. The Helios scepter could be considered second to none amongst all of the magical equipment currently owned by Lin Li in terms of power. The staff that Lin Li had been using was already the best one in his inventory. However, it seemed to pale in comparison to the Helios scepter, which overshadowed it immediately. Even the debris of the stars was not as powerful as the Helios scepter. While Lin Li was rejoicing, he could not help but secretly feel thankful for summoning the Lord of Nightmares in time. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to suppress Vidas, who was using the powerful Helios scepter that could probably only be rivaled by a legendary mage who was at his peak or a powerhouse of the Sanctuary realm. The Harvest Square had been ruined beyond recognition. Lin Li immediately placed the Helios scepter in the Ring of Endless Storm without asking for Vidas' opinion, after which he walked down the ruined square with Wilkinson and the other pharmacists. Aratha looked at Didas, who was still a little embarrassed and shocked. The outcome was not too bad, because there wasn't a major problem after all. Didas' loss of the Helios scepter would be a problem between them that had nothing to do with him, since he was just a castellan. Seeing that Lin Li and the others had left, he frantically chased after them in a bid to invite them to Castellan Mansion where he could make it up to them. Lin Li actually didn't hold anything against Aratha. After all, he was the greatest winner of the battle, and had not only gained precious combat experience, but also attained the Helios scepter. He even joked about having to thank Aratha, the middleman. However, he did not accept William's invitation to the auction with the intention to go on a holiday. He could not afford to waste any time at all, and he felt like he was racing against time every single day. After turning down Aratha's invitation, Lin Li, Wilkinson, and the other pharmacists got inside a luxurious carriage prepared long ago for them, and followed William to the time consignment store. The auction had already ended, and Lin Li was the ultimate winner. However, William made plenty of gains as well. Putting aside the total amount that he had earned from the auction, the record-breaking sale of the potion and the tree branch, which were each sold for millions of gold coins, gave the time consignment store and William a boost in reputation. That alone was a massive gain. Actually, William ought to be happy about making such gains. However, at this moment, he felt more disturbed and anxious than ever. He thought that he had already overestimated Lin Li, but it seemed now that he had actually underestimated him. Hence, he had behaved inappropriately, and probably offended Lin Li earlier on. Master Felix, you should know how precious those potion recipes are. Hence, I didn't bring all of them along previously, William explained conscientiously to Lin Li while seated in the carriage. The last time William visited the Tower of Dusk, he was there mainly with the intention of getting Lin Li to take a look at the pharmaceutical formulas that had been passed down from the Dark Age, in addition to inviting Lin Li and others to participate in the auction. Of course, at that time, William had had no idea that Lin Li was so learned in pharmaceutics, and he simply thought that the Tower of Dusk had merely gained the support of a team of pharmacists. Due to the fact that William had been requesting help from Lin Li at that time, he'd felt pressured and obligated to give the formula to Lin Li. As he explained just now, the formulae were way too precious, and it was naturally impossible to bring them all with him. After all, he'd merely wanted to verify the feasibility of the formula. The problem was that he'd originally thought about sending those formulas to Lin Li and just forgetting about it since he had plenty of other items that he could offer in exchange for a deal. However, after he returned and looked at those formulas, he discovered a half formula based on the nuances of the texture of the paper. In other words, he had only given half a formula to Lin Li. In fact, William ought not to be blamed. After all, he was not a real pharmacist, and his understanding of the formulae of potions was only limited to the names of herbs. According to logical reasoning of most ordinary people, a formula would usually be written on both sides of the paper. However, he had no idea that one of the formulas he had bought was very likely to help a pharmaceutics guru to become promoted to a divine smith. It was a formula that was known to be the one for the divine potion, and could not be written on a simple piece of paper. The formulae of potions included more than just the types, amounts, and proportions of herbs required. There were also instructions on the processing and extractions of required essences of herbs, the method of preparation, and the special issues that required further attention. In fact, it also included a list of necessary equipment, some of which had to be exclusively customized. The design sketches of the equipment were also part of the pharmaceutical formulas. Ordinary pharmaceutical formulas naturally did not require so many trivial things and details, because the processing of herbs could be universal, and standard equipment was used most of the time. However, the divine potion had the ability to promote a pharmacist to a divine smith. Lin Li had obtained 2 pieces of paper, on which the formula of the potion was written. However, there were 6 other pieces of paper in William's vault, which included formulae and the sketches of the necessary equipment. Originally, William had thought that this matter was not important, and he was even a little thrilled about the fact that he was not to be blamed. He only managed to deduce from the texture of the paper that they perhaps belonged to the same set. He believed that Lin Li wouldn't hold it against him once he explained himself clearly. However, he had never once expected that Lin Li would create a potion that ended up being sold for millions of gold coins, and even be followed by a daunting legendary battle. Lin Li had even managed to defeat the elven legendary mage Vidas. Either of the two titles, Master of Pharmacy and Legendary Mage, signified an extremely honorable status, yet the young 20-year-old Lin Li actually possessed both. Even a fool wouldn't believe that the president of the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic had a normal relationship with the Supreme Council. The more noble people were, the more they bothered about their pride. Hence, William was now worried that he might have mistakenly offended Lin Li. In reality, when William invited Lin Li to the vault of the Time Consignment Store, he had the intention to atone for his mistakes and get closer to Lin Li. The vault contained treasures that had been accumulated and collected by more than 10 generations over hundreds of years. It could be said to be the foundation of the Time Consignment Store, and the treasures in the vault were priceless. Lin Li was the first outsider to visit the vault in hundreds of years. That alone showed how important the cooperation was to William. Along the way, they were all heavily guarded. The guards of the Time Consignment Store protected the Time Consignment Store seamlessly with numerous magic gears and magewefts, which made Lin Li feel a little daunted. If William did not lead the way, he would probably have to pay a huge price to get into the vault with the current abilities of the Tower of Dusk. The passageway of the basement continued to extend all the way down, and when they reached almost 100 meters below ground, they finally saw a huge metal gate which was almost 10 meters high. They had no idea what kind of metal it was made of, but there was an icy cold, metallic luster that showed some magical waves on it. However, they did not know if the waves had come from the metal gate itself, or from the treasures hidden behind. William stopped in his tracks when he was in front of the entrance, and whipped out a bunch of keys from his chest pocket with a solemn expression. There were hundreds of keys in the bunch, and William began to insert these keys into the keyhole one by one, and twisted them each time they were inserted. William looked just like an old man whose vision was blurry trying hard to find the key to his own home. "Are you kidding me?" Lin Li was secretly amused, and he even chuckled. However, he could no longer chuckle soon enough, because he discovered that the angle and strength applied by William was different each time he twisted the key. Damn it, so it's a magical 1000 contraption lock. How generous of the Time Consignment Store. By the time William stuck the key inside the keyhole, Lin Li could already tell that the lock of the vault was a magical 1000 contraption lock, which was rumored to be unbreakable even for the legendary realm bandits. Lin Li didn't research too much about magic gears, he was at most just a master. There was a definite gap between his knowledge of magic gears and that of magical enchantment and potion making. However, when Lin Li was in the Endless World, he had heard of such locks. Legend had it that there were countless variants of magical 1000 contraption locks, each of which could generate countless possibilities. Even the omniscient deities could not unlock them by calculation alone. The only way to open the magical 1000 contraption lock was to use hundreds to thousands of keys which were to be twisted in different angles. There must not be any errors throughout the process. Of course, only 100-something keys were used for this lock, and it was not the most complicated one of all. A truly impressive magical 1000 contraption lock would require more than 1,000 keys, and some absurd ones would require more than 10,000 ones. Of course, such locks only existed in legends. Lin Li remembered that the magical 1000 contraption locks were also known as Vientian. Although it was only a basic magical 1000 contraption lock, it still took William half an hour to unlock. By the time William stopped, he had already broken out into sweat that stained his forehead. "Alright, Mage Felic, we can go in now." William opened the door slowly after speaking apologetically. Everyone was instantly greeted with a clear view of what was inside the vault. It was not luxurious or full of gems, most of the items were peculiar and bizarre collectibles instead. There was a plethora of magical equipment, magical gemstones, and other gear used by various professions, such as pharmaceutical tools, and furnaces, and hammers used by blacksmiths. There were also inscription brushes for mage weapon scribing and various tools for the crafting of magic gears. The group took a sweeping glance at the items, and soon arrived in the area where formulas were kept. William carefully opened a magic chest, and retrieved some scrolls. He specially took out 6 scrolls which he then handed to Lin Li, and conscientiously said, "Master Felix, I'm really sorry. These 6 scrolls should be a part of the potion formula that I had given you previously. Please check that it's correct." Had he known earlier that the formula was for such an impressive potion, he wouldn't have given it away so willingly. Before Lin Li even extended his hand, Wilkinson and the other pharmacists grabbed the scrolls and opened one of them before handing it to Lin Li. Lin Li had already studied the formula, and after taking a quick glance at the scrolls, he was certain that it was the formula for the divine potion. The scroll contained the design sketches for some equipment to be used for the preparation. Although Lin Li remained calm on the surface, he was actually secretly feeling happy about it. It contained various principles of pharmaceutics, and it was indeed a recipe that could help one be promoted to a divine smith. Of course, the formula alone was not enough. Lin Li had studied the formula he had thoroughly, and discovered that all of the required herbs were rare and hard to find. However, it was just one of the problems. The materials that were to be used with the specialized equipment and tools were extremely rare, and the crafting process was tedious too. The process of concocting potions required more than just precision in technique. It also required the mastery of the rule power. Lin Li knew that if the tough conditions were met, he would probably get to be promoted to a divine smith, which was the pinnacle of the pharmaceutical industry. It was said to be a level that only gods and deities could reach. Next, Lin Li proceeded to look at the other formulas. Although none of them impressed him, their effects were still rather attractive. For example, one of the formulas that was for a dragon's clout potion was actually rather rare, and the potion formulated using it would allow the user to temporarily obtain the power of a WYRM. There would be huge improvement in physical strength and power, and the herbs required by that potion were not that difficult to obtain. The cost price of one serving of that potion was at most 20,000 gold coins. A weak army of soldiers would experience a massive increase in battle power if combined with a large supply of Dragon's Clout potion. The Withering Potion was a natural magical buff that would allow one to be almost immune to magic after consuming it. Although the effects would only last for a short period of time, a mere minute was enough to cause terrible damage to a mage who was an expert in nature magic. For example, if Lin Li had had a bottle of Withering Potion during the battle just then, he would have been able to defeat Vidos more decisively. As Lin Li browsed through the formulas in his hand one by one, his grin became wider and wider. They were precious gems that could not be bought with money. Besides, he already had a team of capable pharmacists, and the Tower of Dusk would have plenty of formidable potions once the batch of herbs from 7-leaf grass arrived. At this moment, William could tell from the look on Lin Li's face that he was confident of making potions out of these formulas which had been said by pharmaceutical masters to be impossible to concoct. Hence, he took the opportunity to smilingly say, "Master Felix, do consider cooperating with us." Lin Li nodded silently without even looking at William. William did not find anything wrong with his attitude, because he knew that a pharmacist would be greatly enticed by a formula that he had never seen before, just like mages who were attracted to new magical spells. Hence, William cleared his throat again gently, and then, with a smile on his face, said, "Master Felix, I already have a plan for our cooperation. I shall tell you about it. Formulas are the most important when it comes to pharmaceutics, followed by the herbs required during the concoction. Hence, after I gave it some consideration, I suggest that I supply you with all of the herbs that are required by the formulas, while the Tower of Dusk provides the concoction technique. We shall split the sales proceeds of the potions in a 60-40 ratio, with the time consignment store enjoying a 60% share and 40% for Tower of Dusk. What do you think?" Lin Li smiled and waved at Wilkinson, gesturing for him and his peers to put the formulas down. He then turned around and looked at William quietly, after which he turned around and walked towards the vault's exit. Wilkinson and the rest hurriedly cast the formulas aside and chased after Lin Li. William panicked, for the formulas would go to waste if there wasn't someone to use them to concoct potions. He frantically chased after Lin Li and begged, "Master Felix, please don't go, please don't go. If there's anything that you're upset about, we can always talk things out. Business is all about discussing." Lin Li stopped in his tracks and glanced at William derisively. He then said with a faint smile, "That's right, business deals happen after discussion. However, Mr. William, you seem to have forgotten that I'm not a businessman. I'm just a mage, and discussion doesn't exist in the dictionaries of mages." William felt his heart contracting vigorously, and he finally realized what the problem was. The young man in front of him was not his usual business partners. He was a powerful mage who had defeated Master Vidas from the Elven Kingdom in the Harvest Square not too long ago. He was a level 22 legendary mage, a terrifying existence. As the winner of the battle in the Harvest Square, there was indeed no need for the young Lin Li to negotiate with anyone. He only decided to come not because of William or the time consignment store, but because he was interested purely in the formulas. In fact, Lin Li could easily snatch the formulae from the time consignment store if he really wanted to. There was nothing William could defend himself with, especially since Lin Li had the ability to defeat Vidas. William scolded himself for being silly in his head. Why did he even pull his business tactics on the 20-year-old Lin Li? Wasn't he just asking for death? He coughed awkwardly, and adjusted his mindset before respectfully saying, "Master Felix, why don't I supply the formulas and herbs, while the Tower of Dusk carries out the formulation? You shall have 60% of the proceeds while I take 40%. Will that do?" Lin Li smiled, and said, "Mr. William, I don't think you understood what I meant. I'm not here to discuss a business deal with you. What I'm interested in are these formulas. As for the business deal, there'll be someone else to discuss with you." Upon hearing his words, William immediately pointed at the box of recipes without hesitation, and said, "Please, these formulas are only going to go to waste if they're left in my hands. Only you can realize their value." Norfeller placed the scrolls in the box and put the lid on as if it belonged to him. After receiving the formulas, Lin Li nodded in satisfaction, and said, "Rest assured, Mr. William. I won't take these formulae from you for nothing. From today onwards, the time consignment store shall have the sole, exclusive right to auction these potions. Don't underestimate this right, because a 10% commission will bring you massive wealth. Although it can't be compared to the Glitter Gold Trade Union, you should have no problem surpassing Castle and Arather." "Hee, I hope so, I hope so," William chuckled, though he felt different deep down. He believed in the power of the pharmacists and the fact that several precious pharmaceutical formulas would bring any force a massive amount of wealth. However, William did not think that the exclusive auction right alone would allow him to surpass Castle and Arather, for the Arather family had already been the Castellans for more than 100 years. Who could compare to the experience and wealth that they had accumulated for hundreds of years? Not to forget, they were in Roland City, the richest place in the entire Breezy Plains. The huge grain production of countless farms brought immeasurable wealth to Arather. Lin Li smiled and shook his head, well aware of what William was thinking. He simply did not want to expose William. Hence, he smiled, and casually said, "By the way, Mr. William, if there's not much for you to do lately, you may start preparing for the publicity and advertisement matters. As for the content, you may revolve it around the theme of Dragon's Clout Potion." "Alright," William nodded. Just as he was about to confirm the publicity details, his face stiffened, and he gaped like a cat which had just gotten its tail stepped on. He screeched, "What? What? Dragon's Clout Potion?" "Yes, Dragon's Clout Potion. One of the formulas that you had given me was used by the elves to create the Dragon's Clout Potion for the nurturing of the ghost warriors." William swallowed his saliva forcefully and stood still as if he had been struck by a spell. Dragon's Clout Potion. William had never expected one of the formulas which he had casually chucked in the vault to turn out to be that for the Dragon's Clout Potion. William had never seen a real Dragon's Clout Potion in the flesh before, but it was a magical potion that was mentioned several times in Legends of the Dark Age, together with the formidable ghost warriors. The High Elves had always been known for their magic. In fact, they even had a magic legion comprised of archmages. However, the High Elves did not rely on their mages to gain dictatorship over the world. The Ghost Warrior army was their strongest asset. Everyone knew that the High Elves ruled Amrel, and that the Ghost Warriors were all selected from various races. They needed not have extraordinary magical talent or stunning looks, but they had to have powerful physical strength and great courage. After being selected to join the army, they would enjoy great respect and a high status that was worlds apart from their former identity, which was akin to slaves. If they could make a great contribution to the army, they would even have the opportunity to become low-level aristocrats, which was incredible in Amrel at that time. The Dragon's Clout Potion was one of the enviable privileges enjoyed by the Ghost Warrior army back then. The large amounts of Dragon's Clout Potion would allow Ghost Warrior army to enjoy immeasurable strength and power on the battlefield. Unfortunately, the Dragon's Clout Potion was lost as the Dark Age passed and the High Elves got buried by time. William had never expected to hear a young mage tell him in the vault of the Time Consignment Store that the formula he had just given him was for the Dragon's Clout Potion. William absolutely regretted it. That was the formula of the Dragon's Clout Potion. In today's world, where most formulae had already gone missing, it could be considered a priceless treasure. Wilkinson seemed to have seen through William's thoughts. He coldly said, "Mr. William, are you thinking that you should have sold these formulas to the Pharmacists' Guild if you'd known how impressive they were from the start?" How could that be?" William denied, turning as red as a tomato. "Is that so?" Wilkinson sneered in contempt, and continued, "Actually, Mr. William, if you'd like to back out, you still have time to do so. We've never liked forcing others against their will. If you think that you'd prefer to sell these formulas to the Pharmacists' Guild, you may change your mind now. However, I have to remind you that no other pharmacist in Amrel, apart from President Felix, can formulate the potion perfectly. By the way, my name is Wilkinson, and I'm the apprentice of Mr. Balba, the president of the Amrel Pharmacists' Guild. When I said that no other pharmacist can formulate that potion, I meant that even my teacher Balba can't do so." No, not at all," William said frantically with an awkward expression upon hearing Wilkinson's harsh sarcastic remark. At the start, he'd indeed been patronizing them, but when he heard Wilkinson's words, he began to feel terrified. Even though Lin Li's potion was auctioned off at a sky-high price of more than 10 million gold coins, William still did not pin any hopes on him. William had always thought that there was an independent pharmaceutical team behind the Tower of Dusk, because he could not figure out where the senior pharmacists had come from. Senior pharmacists were destined to be the brightest shining stars who couldn't be overshadowed by anything else in this world. That was also the reason William had not thought about the Pharmacist Guild. No one would believe that a bunch of low-level and intermediate pharmacists would be able to advance to senior pharmacists after just a few months of training. That was a crazy and absurd idea. However, William knew that Wilkinson was a true senior pharmacist who was going to become a master of pharmaceutics. Hence, he was definitely not insane, and his words ought not be doubted. Actually, William also knew that the formulae would just end up going to waste in his hands. It was not that he had not inquired about them from the Pharmacist Guild before. The Master of Pharmaceutics from the guild told him that there might not be a single pharmacist in the entire world of Amrel who could formulate the potions. It seemed that this cooperation would be a loss for William, who would be earning less money. The problem was that he would not earn a single cent if there was no one to concoct the potions based on the formulae. Sometimes, he ought to be content with whatever he earned, even if it was just a small amount of profit. After all, it was at least better than nothing. William was not a greedy person, and he soon figured it all out. They left the underground vault, and William ushered them upstairs. Since they've already decided on cooperation, they had to discuss the details thoroughly. The Archmage Gavin had always been the one in charge of business-related matters for the Tower of Dusk, and this time was no exception. Lin Li, who had nothing to do, whipped out the formulas and scrutinized them carefully, scroll after scroll. Lin Li unfolded one of the scrolls slowly, and frowned as soon as he saw the content. he thought. This damn scroll is not a pharmaceutical formula at all. Although the formulas of advanced potions often included the assembling method of specialized equipment, the scrolls were clearly just design sketches of certain equipment. Initially, Lin Li was not that bothered by it. However, his face began to grow sullen as he continued to read the rest of the scroll. With his outstanding abilities as a forging guru, he soon discovered the amazing aspect of the sketch. It turned out to be a master-level forging design sketch that he was not confident of mastering. Besides, it was the sketch for an extremely rare manual crossbow. Judging from the blueprint, Lin Li speculated that this rather delicate crossbow would be at most the size of a palm after it was made. This was good news to Lin Li. For a very long time, Lin Li had wanted to get a long-range weapon for self-defense. He had two reasons, one being the fact that he used to be a hunter, and personally favored long-range weapons, and the other being that long-range weapons were more convenient and suitable for a mage's use. However, what annoyed smithing guru Lin Li was the fact that although he knew countless forging blueprints, there were few that truly suited him. Even if there was one or two that were suitable, Lin Li would give up on them due to his strict selection criteria. Up till now, Lin Li had only chosen this forging blueprint from the pile of potion formulas. Lin Li spent just 10 seconds to confirm that the crossbow on the blueprint was the defense weapon he had always wanted. According to the High Elf's print introduction of the blueprint, the crossbow was named Enchantress's Howl, and had been designed by a royal smithing guru in the Dark Age. It was said that when this High Elf smithing guru was designing this crossbow, he had wanted to give it to a mage friend for defense. Unfortunately, that mage friend had died during war when the blueprint had just been drawn and hadn't even been tested. Moreover, the materials needed to make this Enchantress's Howl were so outrageously expensive that even this smithing guru who got his salary from the royal family couldn't collect all of them, which would reduce any powerhouse to extreme poverty at once. With these two reasons, the making of this crossbow was delayed. The Enchantress's Howl still remained in the blueprint stage till the death of this smithing guru. Luckily, I have some savings. Lin Li glanced at the materials listed on the blueprint, and drew a few cold breaths with much heartache. While Lin Li was examining this crossbow blueprint with much interest, Gavin and William's negotiation had come to consensus too. Gavin was undoubtedly very talented in the field of business. Once he had sat down in front of the negotiation table, he instantly forgot all his excitement during the earlier battle, and only thought about how to maximize the benefits of the Tower of Dusk. 1. The aim of this negotiation wasn't about exploiting the other party. If the other side couldn't get any benefits from it, all the benefits he could get now were just short-term benefits. The aim of the negotiation was to achieve a win-win scenario and maximize his own benefits while making sure that the other side could also gain from the deal. Gavin knew on what he could compromise and on what he couldn't. He knew what the Tower of Dusk didn't really care about but the other side could gain from. Hence, both sides finally came to a consensus after the negotiation. The content of the agreement was briefly as such: the Tower of Dusk would provide technical support, while William would provide the funding and avenue. The revenue would be divided with the Tower of Dusk getting 70% and the Time Consignment Store getting 30%. This appeared to be the Tower of Dusk bullying William. Therefore, as compensation, the Tower of Dusk could send 2 pharmacists who were above the medium level to the Time Consignment Store whenever possible. Lin Li was very clear that one could have a strong stance, but certainly couldn't be tyrannical. Not to mention that he was a legendary mage now, and he couldn't make everyone work for him for free even after he reached the Sanctuary Realm. Since this was a collaboration, he had to make sure that the other side was profiting too and got its fair share. Upon hearing Gavin's report, Lin Li was quite satisfied with this deal. Although another condition was added in the end, it could be considered advantageous for the pharmacists in the Tower of Dusk. Lin Li couldn't teach them much more theoretical knowledge. What they needed now was practice. Since the Time Consignment Store was willing to take charge of the supply of herbs, Lin Li was naturally willing to let his subordinates have a try. This could also increase the Tower of Dusk's reputation. This was called everyone got what they wanted. Lin Li was glad that the pharmacists had a place to practice, while William hoped that these pharmacists could stay at his store forever. After all, why did all the factions abandon focusing on the bustling breezy plains and go to a small place like Duland? Wasn't it just to poach the pharmacists from the Tower of Dusk? Although he was on the lower end in terms of the splitting of revenue, William was secretly rejoicing over the fact that 2 high-level pharmacists were coming to his store, not at all feeling that he'd lost out. Hence, upon hearing that Lin Li was leaving soon after the negotiation, William sincerely urged him to stay. The next day, Castellan Arather of Roland City visited Lin Li with much unease. Other than bringing expensive gifts, he had invited Lin Li and his companions to the Castellan mansion as guests again. Actually, Lin Li was the biggest winner of this incident. Although he didn't need to thank Arather, there was also no need for him to be petty with what had happened earlier. Doing that would also be unsuitable with his status as a legendary powerhouse. So, when Arather had shown enough sincerity and personally visited him, Lin Li didn't pick on Arather on purpose. Honestly speaking, Arather was quite proud of himself to have such foresight. How many 20-year-old legendary mages had there been till now? Even the god of mages Juresco only reached the legendary realm at the age of 23. Even if this Master Felic couldn't reach Juresco's standards, his achievements now were already unreachable for the majority of the people. Everyone wanted to pull strings with this legendary mage after witnessing the legendary battle in the Harvest Square. Arather's foresight came from the fact that his children were already considered this Master Felic students since a year ago. Although the biggest reason why Lin Li had agreed to it was to hide from that female knight who was a crazy devotee of the Brilliant Shrine, Lin Li still had to take up his responsibility as a teacher no matter why he'd agreed to teach Arather's children. Moreover, Arather's children were both quite talented in magic, and Lin Li didn't want to see their talents go to waste. Of course, Lin Li also asked about the elven legendary mage Vidas while teaching the 2 students. After all, not only did Vidas not get the debris of the star's rebirth, but also lost a Helios scepter. Probably nobody could accept such an outcome. However, Arather seemed to be hiding something about this. He always avoided the question, and had a rather awkward expression. Lin Li thought it was funny, and didn't question him further. He knew that this Castellan also had things beyond his control. Just when Lin Li had reached his house, that noble-looking and stern old housekeeper reported that close to 100 different factions had come to visit just today alone. Though these people didn't get to meet Lin Li, they still left precious gifts behind. In fact, they felt it was better not to meet Lin Li, otherwise, even their gifts would be directly rejected. After the legendary battle in the Harvest Square, the saddest ones were certainly those who had wanted to poach pharmacists from the Tower of Dusk. For them, every minute and every second was a torture. They feared that their painstakingly built faction would disappear from the breezy plains in the blink of an eye. What people could do when facing a legendary powerhouse was just keep sending gifts. Obviously, the target of this gift sending was changed to this young president of the Tower of Dusk and legendary powerhouse, Master Felic, whom many had looked down on before. Not to mention these factions, even those who believed they had never offended the Tower of Dusk and Master Felic before also wanted to gain some connections with this young legendary powerhouse. Nobody could ignore a legendary powerhouse, not to mention a young legendary powerhouse who had just turned 20. Almost everyone who William had invited for the auction stayed after the auction. Outside Lin Li's house, it was crowded beyond words. Everyone brought along gifts, all hoping to meet Lin Li with sincerity, no matter how high their status was in the breezy plains was. Of course, they didn't want to discuss the weather when meeting Lin Li. Lin Li wasn't so free. He also didn't meet some of these people, because of the expensive gifts they had brought along. In fact, these people wouldn't possess any gifts that were truly precious to a legendary powerhouse. Other than miracles like the debris of the stars, what could entice Lin Li was only things that could benefit the Tower of Dusk's development. 1 week later, Lin Li returned from Roland City full of prizes. Even Lin Li was surprised that he had gained so much from this trip to Roland City. Although he had spent all the gold coins that he had earned from the auction of potion on the debris of the star's rebirth, he felt it was totally worth it. Rebirth was the one and only in the whole of Amrel, and was a piece of debris of the stars. Not to mention 15 million gold coins. He could have paid 30 million or even 60 million gold coins to get it. Moreover, Lin Li had also unexpectedly gained a helioscepter that was worth the same as the debris of the stars, as well as experienced fighting with a level 22 legendary mage. Just talking about the helioscepter's power, it was even stronger than the debris of the stars, and on a totally different level compared to the ether staff that he'd used so far. Not only had he gained precious fighting experience from the battle with legendary mage Vidas, he had also used this opportunity to gain more control over the Lord of Nightmares. These were just personal gains for Lin Li. The trip to Roland City was also very rewarding to the Tower of Dusk. Lin Li and his companions brought back many contracts of every type. There was the herb supply contract, potion sales contract, mage training contract, and magical items purchase priority contract. These contracts were all negotiated by Gavin personally. Lin Li was quite trusting of Gavin's negotiation skills. Evidence had shown that Gavin had done a great job and had maximized the interests of the Tower of Dusk in every negotiation. These contracts would bring consistent flow of cash into the Tower of Dusk for its future development and sustainability. It was right to say that the Tower of Dusk had stepped into a positive developmental path from today. Before this, Lin Li had been supporting the Tower of Dusk all by himself. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the Tower of Dusk would have disappeared from the breezy plains within days if not for Lin Li. Lin Li had obtained the Throne of Darkness, discovered the underground palace, and wiped out the Sire bandits. These, however, were only one-off events. Nobody could rely on just discovering ruins to ensure the survival and development of a faction. In addition, Lin Li would be so lucky to always find treasures in ruins. Once all ruins were discovered, how would the Tower of Dusk survive? However, everything was different starting from today. The Tower of Dusk could now touch on every single area of the breezy plains through these contracts. A third of all the notable factions in the breezy plains now had some kind of business connection with the Tower of Dusk. This meant that the Tower of Dusk had truly integrated into the breezy plains now. After coming back to the Tower of Dusk, Lin Li didn't waste any time, and got busy with the matters in Tower of Dusk in an orderly manner. First, he had to send 10 archmages to protect the 7-leaf grasses caravan like he had told its boss Charles before. With the current abilities of the Tower of Dusk, sending out 10 archmages was a piece of cake. With Lichaj Falusi going as well, the caravan of the 7-leaf grass would come back from the Elven Kingdom unharmed even if they faced the second-ranked bandit clan on the way. Fortunately, Gavin, who was a mage talented in business, could help out so that Lin Li didn't have to waste precious time on all those complicated business contracts. Be it the business with Glitter Gold Trade Union, Gilded Rose, and the Manhwa family, or the collaboration with the Time Consignment Store and the business contracts with various factions, Gavin managed all of them meticulously. Of course, Wilkinson and his companions became busier as the amount of business increased. Lin Li was also stricter with them. Be it high or medium-level pharmacists, all the pharmacists didn't slack at all. They spent every day in the potion laboratory. However, none of them had any complaints despite being so busy, as the large amount of practice had brought about great improvements in their pharmaceutics capability. Beckley, who had sent letters to the Manhwa family as the messenger of the Tower of Dusk, received a secret mission from the president again. He had to go further for this mission than the last, to the land of blacksmiths and wheat wine, the Dwarf Kingdom. He had to go there to discuss the purchase of crystal cannons. Lin Li wanted to build the Tower of Dusk into an indestructible combat fortress. Hence, the highly destructive crystal cannons were an indispensable item in this plan. Nobody could imagine how a magical tower equipped with 20+ crystal cannons would look like. After all, even the royal palace of the Dwarf Kingdom only had over 10 crystal cannons. However, although the crystal cannons were very powerful, they weren't easy to construct. Even the Dwarf Kingdom, which possessed the greatest number of blacksmiths, couldn't construct 20-odd crystal cannons in a short time. Beckley was going to the Dwarf Kingdom, this time mainly to negotiate the price of these crystal cannons as well as to push the production forward. He couldn't just disassemble the crystal cannons on the walls of the Dwarf Kingdom city walls, after all. With the end of the auction, the leaders of each invited faction all left Roland City and returned to their respective areas. What happened during the auction also spread like fire throughout the breezy plains. If it weren't these reputable people telling the tale, nobody would believe that it was true. A potion auctioned at 10 million gold coins and a legendary mage only 20? Those had exceeded the limit of people's imagination. Countless people especially yearned to see the legendary battle in the Harvest Square with their own eyes. Nowadays, it was very hard to see a true legendary powerhouse, not to mention witnessing a battle between two legendary powerhouses. Everyone in the breezy plains changed their attitude towards the Tower of Dusk radically almost overnight. Before this, everyone was just very scornful and jealous that some lucky lad who had established a small guild of magic for less than a year had garnered the support of a batch of high-level pharmacists. However, no one dared to show any disdain for the Tower of Dusk now, as that would make themselves appear to be extremely stupid. Moreover, nobody felt any jealousy, as they were clear that it was totally natural for this young Master Felix to achieve everything he had with his abilities. The reason why people had got jealous was because they had felt that they were better than Lin Li in some aspects, but didn't get the same kind of results as Lin Li. This had made them feel very wronged and get green with envy. However, nobody dared to compare themselves to this young Master Felix now. Just his current legendary realm power was unattainable for many people, not mentioning the fact that he was only 20, and it was only a matter of time before he reached Sanctuary Realm. Before this, people knew about the Tower of Dusk only because of the high-level pharmacists in it. However, anyone who didn't know who the owner of the Tower of Dusk was by now would be mocked by everyone. Almost everyone in the breezy plains knew about Master Felix and the legendary battle in the Harvest Square. There were even bards who wrote epic poems about this battle. The whole breezy plains got into a frenzy over the deeds of Master Felix like a pot of boiling water for the moment. A month passed, just like this. Much to the relief of various factions, the Tower of Dusk didn't seem to have any intention of settling old scores with them. It still accepted their gifts and did business with them as usual. Thinking about it, Master Felix didn't just become a legendary mage. If he had really wanted to settle the old scores, he wouldn't have had to wait until now. Lin Li had just been a homebody who gamed at home every day before he came to Amril. Thus, he didn't like the feeling of being known by everyone now. It was his personality to amass wealth while keeping a low profile. However, he also knew that he was the current owner of the Tower of Dusk and president of the Guild of Magic in the Breezy Plains, so it was hard to keep a low profile even if he wanted to. In fact, Lin Li's reputation in the Breezy Plains skyrocketed after the incident, and this was a great pushing force for the development of the Tower of Dusk. The most direct evidence of this was that many mages requested to join. It was a stark contrast to the desolate scene when the Tower of Dusk had just been established. A young mage stood by the entrance of the potion laboratory, and looked at Lin Li, who was walking out with inconcealable admiration. He said in a trembling voice, "President Felix, Hutton of the Manhwa family wants to see you." "Oh?" Lin Li was rather surprised, and couldn't think of a reason why Hutton would suddenly want to meet him. Though the Tower of Dusk and the Manhwa family had business connections, there were people in charge of the specific businesses. Since he had come back from wiping out the Sire bandits, this was the first time Hutton came to the Tower of Dusk to meet him. This wasn't Hutton's fault, actually. From seeing Lin Li defeat the Lord of Darkness at the Abyss of Tharlan to witnessing him kill 10 archmages with a single blow in the Dragon Mountains, Hutton feared Lin Li from the bottom of his heart. Even though the Manhwa family now collaborated with the Tower of Dusk, and the incident in the Blackstone Mountains had long ended, that uncontrollable, intrinsic fear made Hutton tremble involuntarily every time he thought of Lin Li. When Lin Li came to the reception room, other than Hutton, there was also a stern-looking middle-aged man in the room. Though they were talking about something, Hutton had to turn his body slight when he talked, and the middle-aged man just sat upright and still. When they saw Lin Li enter the room, both rose and walked towards Lin Li with smiles. "Master Felix, I am so sorry. I should have come for a visit officially after wiping out the Sire bandits in the Dragon Mountains. However, I only came today." Hutton's face was all smiles, but he held complex feelings. This person standing in front of him was even younger than him, but he couldn't even call himself a genius when compared with Lin Li. Lin Li didn't respond to Hutton immediately, but looked at the middle-aged man. He smiled, and said, "I didn't expect Master Cheyenne to visit me personally. Please excuse me for my impropriety in making you wait so long." There were just two people Lin Li respected in the Manhwa family. One of them was the current patriarch and Hutton's father, Sorensen. The other was Hutton's teacher and the pillar of the entire Manhwa family, legendary mage Cheyenne. Although Cheyenne was a middle-aged man as old as Hutton's father, the aura of a legendary powerhouse radiating from his body couldn't escape Lin Li's senses, as he was also a legendary powerhouse. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.